Hello and welcome to another tutorial. In this video I'm going to show you how to install a web server stack that consists of Nginx, PHP and MySQL on a virtual private server running Ubuntu 20.04. Now there are three prerequisites for this. The first is that you have a virtual private server or a server that is running Ubuntu 20.04. This will work with prior versions of Ubuntu, but you may have different versions of Nginx, PHP and or MySQL because the same versions that are available for Ubuntu 20.04 may not be available for prior versions, but you should still be able to follow along. The second prerequisite is that you have a user that you can connect to a terminal on the server using SSH, and that user has permission to run commands using sudo. The third prerequisite, which is optional, is that you have a DNS record pointing a domain name to your server's IP address. I say it's optional because you can follow along without this, but there are parts that you won't be able to complete if you don't have this set up, such as setting up an Nginx server block for the domain and then visiting the domain in a browser to view the files that are served by that server block. So if you haven't got a domain name pointing to your server's IP address, you won't be able to do that part, but you can still follow along to the other parts of the tutorial. So I'll get started. The first thing I'm going to do, which is a good habit to get into, is I'm going to check that there aren't any packages on the system that could be updated. And if there are, I'm going to update them. And I'm also going to run this auto remove command, which will remove any dependencies that aren't needed anymore, so you don't have packages lying around that aren't used, essentially. So yeah, this is a good habit to get into because it just ensures that any security updates that are available or bug fixes are installed promptly. So it can help keep your system secure. Right, next I'm going to install Nginx. And if I now list the contents of the /var/www/html folder, we'll see a file. So this is the default web root, or the web root for the default Nginx server block. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the owner and group of the /var/www folder recursively to www-data. And I'm going to grant the group write permissions recursively to that folder, and also add the current user I'm logged in as, which is the admin user, to the www-data group. So if I do sudo change owner -r www-data www-data and sudo change mod -r group plus write /var/www, and then I'm going to run sudo usermod -g or -ag www-data admin. So this is going to add the admin user to that group. So what that enables me to do is to add, edit and delete files within the /var/www folder and any folders beneath it without having to run the nano command as sudo. Or without having to elevate to sudo privileges. Right, okay, so I should, as long as everything's gone correctly, which it should have, be able to see the contents of that file when I request my server's IP address in the browser. And then if I just look at the contents of that file, we will see that it's a match. So yeah, if you see here, we've got a H1 tag and it contains welcome to Nginx, and then we've got this text here, and that is what we are seeing here. So that's the file that's being served when I request my server's IP address, because it's the file that is served by the default Nginx server block. Okay, so next I'm going to install PHP. And I'm installing the PHP 7.4-FPM package because that's the variant that's compatible with Nginx. If I look at the contents of this Nginx config file, we'll see that this has the default Nginx server block. So we can see this is a server block and it's listening on port 80 and it's the default server. So there isn't a server block that has a server name that matches the domain name for the request or an IP address for the request. Then this is the one that will be used. And we can see it's the root folder is this folder here, and the index directive, which specifies what files to look for in the folder, specifies index.html, index.htm, and index.nginx-debian.html, which is the file we saw earlier. It's got a couple of location blocks. So if I just briefly explain the way Nginx processes a request and examines the location directives. First of all, Nginx will examine the location block directives that have literal strings. Yeah, and it will find the most specific one that matches the URI for the current request. And once it's done that, it will then examine from the top down all of the location blocks that have regular expressions. And as soon as it finds a match, it doesn't examine anymore. So, and it will then use that location block directive to serve the request. If it doesn't find a regular expression, a location block directive that has a regular expression that matches the URI for the current request, it will then use the most specific location block directive with a normal string that matches the URI for the request. And usually what you'll have is you'll have a location block directive that has a normal string that is just a /, and that matches everything. So you can think of that's the default. If nothing else more specific matches, that's the one that will serve the request. Okay, and because of the way that it processes the request and examines the location block directives, the order of the location block directives that have normal strings does not matter, because it's going to examine all of them and find the most specific one. But the order of the location block directives that have regular expressions does matter, because as soon as it finds a match, it won't then examine any ones beneath that one. So say, for example, you have two location block directives that have regular expressions, and they can both potentially match the same URI, and then you'd want the one that has priority above the other one, because if you have the one that takes priority below the other one and the first one matches the URI, then the one beneath it won't be examined, and the first one that matches will then serve the request when you really wanted the one beneath it to serve the request, because that one takes priority. So the order matters for location block directives that have regular expressions, but location block directives that have normal strings does not matter. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to, and we can see here, so we've got one location block directive with a normal string that matches everything because it's just a /, and then we got one lower down that has a regular expression, and the way we know that it's a regular expression is because of the tilde. So with Nginx, anything following the tilde is treated as a regular expression in a location block directive. Okay, and here it's the regular expression is .php at the end of the URI, so it means that it will match a request for any PHP file. So with that being said, we're going to uncomment that. And we just need to uncomment the first line, the second one, this one here, which the fast CGI _pass, which will forward the request to the Unix PHP socket file, and then the last line here, which closes the location block directive. And then if I create a file, a PHP file, okay, admin. Okay, what I just done there was I've essentially sort of created a new session. So because I added the admin user to the www-data group, but for that to take effect, I need to sort of refresh my session. So I can either log out and log back in, or I can switch user. I can use the su command, which is the switch user command, and then essentially change to the user that I'm already authenticated as, but it just refreshes the session, and the system picks up that I'm now part of the www-data group. And I'm just gonna simply print hello world to the screen. And then I just need to reload Nginx. There are a couple of ways to reload Nginx. One of the ways is using the service command, but the reason why I'm doing it this way, by running sudo space Nginx space -s space reload, is because this will validate the configuration changes prior to reloading Nginx, and if there are any errors in the configuration changes, then it will roll back to the previous configuration. So what that does is it stops you from potentially breaking the site. If you have an error in your Nginx configuration that could potentially stop your website from working, reloading Nginx this way will prevent that configuration from coming into effect, because it validates the changes first, and if they, as I said, if there's any errors, then it will roll back. That's it's a safety net. So as long as everything's gone correctly there, I should be able to see the contents of that file. Yeah, we can see there. Just prints hello world to the screen. Okay, in this next step, I'm going to set up another Nginx server block for the domain name I set up earlier. So for this step, you'll have to have a DNS A record that points your domain name to your server's IP address. Right, so I'm setting up the server block now. I'm going to listen on port 80. The server name for for me is ec2-3.irubystudios.com. Okay, so the first line specifies that we're listening on port 80. The second line specifies the host name. So this will be the domain name that you've set up that points to your server's IP address. The third line, I'm going to specify the root, which for me is going to be /server/www/example. And the fourth line is going to be the index directive, and I'm going to specify the index.php and index.html files. So they're the files that I want Nginx to look for inside the folder. Next, I'm going to set up a couple of location blocks. The first one will just be a /, so that's the default that will matches everything. And I'm going to use the try files directive to first look for the file that matches the URI, then look for a folder that matches the URI, and if there's no match, then forward the request to index.php. And this option, specifying index.php, will make Nginx do an internal redirect and process the location blocks again, and this time looking for index.php, and which will match this second location block, which I'm gonna use a regular expression that matches any PHP file. So a request for a URI that ends in .php, which will match any PHP file. First, I'm going to set up a fastCGI parameter. Using a couple of built-in variables. This first variable, document_root, will contain a reference to the root folder, which I've specified here, and the second one will be the script that has been requested, the PHP script. Next, I'm going to include some fastCGI params that Nginx provides for us. And finally, I'm going to forward the request to the Unix PHP socket file. Just quickly make sure there are no issues with this. Yeah, it looks good to me. And I'm going to symlink to that file because Nginx will not pick up configuration files in the sites-available folder, so I have to symlink those files, any files within that, to the sites enabled folder for Nginx to pick them up. And then I'm going to create the folder that I used, /server/www/example. Use the -p flag. The -p flag that's passed to the make directory command, in case you're wondering, means it will make all of the folders, any folders that are missing on the path that you specify, will be created. So because I want to create this example folder, but the www folder and the server folder don't exist, so it means it will create them and also create the example folder. So if there's any folder that's missing in the path that you specify, it will create them. And I'm going to create a PHP file inside that folder. going to change the owner and group and grant group permissions to it. And grant the group right permissions to it. Same as I done to the /var/www folder earlier, and recursive for both of those. Right, in this file, I'm just gonna print the underscore file magic constant. Mistake. Oh, okay, made a typo. Fact CGI params instead of fast CGI params. And that was a good example of how Nginx picks up the error. You see, when I attempted to reload it, it showed me the error and it did not reload Nginx to prevent potentially breaking configuration changes from being applied. So now that I've done that, I should be able to visit the site using my domain name. Okay, so I think, what was it? It was, yeah, there we go. So we can see this is the path to that file, the index.php file. Okay, the next stage is to install MySQL. And I'm also going to install the PHP-MySQL extension that allows PHP to connect to MySQL. MySQL provides this handy script that secures the installation. So I'm going to run that now, and it just uses some best practices for the MySQL configuration. The first one is to configure a strength threshold for passwords. Now, I would recommend choosing yes for this. I'm going to choose no, simply because the only reason I'm setting this up is for the purpose of this tutorial, so I'm not going to continue using this database after this tutorial, so I'm not bothered about this. But if I was going to continue using this database, I would most certainly select enter yes here and choose the highest strength threshold for passwords. Now I'm going to enter a password for the root user. As you'll see after this stage, the root user doesn't actually connect using a password by default. They use the auth socket plugin, which uses information about the user that invokes the MySQL binary to authenticate them. So if you invoke the MySQL binary using sudo, you're running it as the root user. So information will be provided to MySQL about that user, and that's how they'll be authenticated. But in case you change it down the line, you change the plugin to a type that requires a password to authenticate, you should set a secure password now for the root user. Remove anonymous users. Yes, we do want to do that. We want to disallow root login remotely. Because we're using the auth socket plugin for the root user, they won't be able to log in remotely anyway. But as I specified earlier, if you change that plugin to one that uses the a password to authenticate the user, then you may be in a situation where they can log in remotely, which you don't want. So you should disallow it here. And there are other ways to disallow remote login. You can do it for all users using the firewall, but it's better to have it restricted in more places than one. So I would recommend entering yes for this. And we want to remove the test database, and we want to reload the privilege tables so these changes take effect right away. Okay, so if I run sudo MySQL, we can see that we've now logged into MySQL using the root user as the root user. And if I do a quick select query, from the MySQL.user table, we can see the root user account here. So host localhost user root, and the plugin is auth_socket, as I mentioned earlier. So now I'm going to create a user. Let's just name them example host localhost and identified by, I'm going to use their username for their password as well. I'm simply doing this because I'm not going to use this database after this tutorial. I'm setting this up just for the purpose of this tutorial, so I'm not bothered about their password being secure. But if I was going to use this database after this going forwards, then I would set a very strong password for this user. So that is, I recommend using a strong password. I'm going to create a database named classic models, and I'm naming it this because I'm going to import a sample database, some sample data later on in this tutorial, and it imports it into a database named classic models. So that is why I'm naming it that. And finally, I'm going to grant the example user full privileges on the classic models database. Okay, so I've logged in as the example user and I can see that database. And if I use that database and run the show tables command, we can see there's no tables in that database yet, but there will be shortly after this next step. So now if you visit this mysqltutorial.org website in your browser and enter the mysql-sample-database.aspx URI, we can see, and actually I'll mention this is a very good website for learning MySQL if you're interested in learning more about MySQL, and they very kindly provide a sample database that you can download. I've already downloaded this, so I'm not going to download it again. What I'm going to do is create the file. First I'm going to change directory to the example directory, and I'm going to create a file named MySQL sample database.sql, and going to open that up using Nano and paste the contents of the sample database into this file. It's quite a lot of data, so it may take a few seconds. Right, that's done. So now I've imported that SQL script. And we can see we got some tables now. If I just run a quick select query on one of the tables, we can see we have some data. Okay, what I want to do now is connect to MySQL using PHP. So I'm going to edit the index.php file. And then just paste in a simple script that connects to the database. So if you go to the php.net-manual-en-pdo.construct.php webpage, you'll see an example for how to connect to PHP to MySQL using PHP PDO. In the first example, we're just going to copy that and paste it in, make a few changes. So database name for us is classic models. The host of the localhost IP address is fine. The user and password is example for us for both. And yeah. And next we're going to paste another simple script. That's just an example query. You can get this from php.net/manual/en/pdo.query.php, and it's the first example. So we're just going to paste that in and update it or change it so it meets our needs. Right, first is customer number, that's the first column, and then customer name, and that's from customers. That's going to change this variable dbh for us. Right, so just going to quickly make sure that's all good. DB name classic models, host is correct, user password both example. Select customer number, customer name from customers, yep. Right, that all looks good to me. And that should then, if we reload this file, yep. So now we're seeing the information that we've selected from the customers table. So that is the end of the tutorial. The purpose of this tutorial is to give you a starting point, like a foundation for you to get a web server stack set up, and then learn more things that you can do. For example, with Nginx, you can use it as a load balancer. With PHP, you can learn about the different settings that you can specify in the php.ini file. And with MySQL on the the official MySQL website, there's lots that you can learn. Also, you can go to the MySQL tutorial.org website, which also has lots of good information. So yeah, I recommend reading up on the Nginx documentation. There's lots of great information there, and also reading up on the different options for PHP and different settings you can use, and learning more about MySQL. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you did, I'd appreciate it if you could like the video, and also if there's anyone else that you think will benefit from this video, if you could share it with them, that would be great. And if you want to see more videos like this, then you should subscribe to my channel. Until next time, all the best.